My mother-in-law is a Yuta, an Okinawan shaman, but apparently she had a friend who could see images of people's entire lives, from birth to death, when she met them. Ordinary Yuta have to first enter a trance-like state, and then wait for the kami-sama to speak to them. Otherwise, they can't do anything. But these so-called Sharp Yuta apparently find life incredibly exhausting. They see other people's lives in their entirety, and if they see someone is possessed by something bad, even if it's just someone passing by in the street, they have to stop that person and help cleanse them. Of course, they can't take money in such cases either, because the kami-sama were putting them to use. But if someone approaches them for help and asks for an exorcism, of course, they are allowed to accept money then. They don't specify the amount. And so, my mother-in-law's friend, I heard she now lives overseas in some Southeast Asian country I've never heard of. She has a helper who does her shopping and other things she would otherwise need to go out for, but she lives locked up in her house and never goes out. However, because important people like politicians and CEOs still visit her for help, she makes more than enough money to live off. Even if you can control a power like she has, having to constantly see such things must indeed be incredibly exhausting. Hey guys, I'm your host Tara A. Devlin, and welcome to this week's episode of Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. If you're looking for more to listen to once you're done with this episode, I've been recording various audiobooks that you can now find on our Patreon, Fourth Wall store, and various audiobook outlets, including Spotify. I'm adding more all the time, so if you need another hit of Japanese horror, head over to patreon.com/TaraADevlin, the Kowabana Fourth Wall shop, or your favorite online store to pick some up right now. This week, we're heading to our final destination on our terrifying trip around Japan, Okinawa. First up, our narrator has a strange dream in which they appear to be possessed, but thankfully their mother is there to help them. But is everything really as it seems to be? Find out in I Was in Bed Like Always. So, the other day, I was in bed like always. I remember I was more tired than usual though, and right as I was drifting off to sleep, it felt like I was floating above my bed a little. Huh? I thought, but I didn't especially feel scared. If anything, I felt excited, like, hey, this is the first time I've ever experienced anything like this. I could clearly feel myself floating about 5 centimeters above the bed, and then I had a dream. In the dream, I was in the living room. I was sitting cross-legged, floating about 15 centimeters above the floor. Bit by bit, I found myself able to move around freely, floating and turning in the air in whichever direction I wanted to go. But I wasn't the only one there. My mother was also beside me, and she looked at me in shock or disbelief or something. "This is so much fun," I said to her, getting more and more excited. By that point, I was moving faster and faster, like I was zooming around the room. "Something has possessed you," my mother suddenly said, a look of surprise on her face. She grabbed a rag from the laundry, then grabbed me as I was floating in the air, and she made motions like she was wiping my face with it. Then I hit the floor with a thud and wasn't able to float again. I remember feeling really annoyed with that fact. When I woke up in the morning, everything was back to normal. I wasn't floating or anything. But that dream felt so real that I told my mother about it. At first, she laughed at me and said it was a strange dream, but when I told her about the part where she wiped my face with a rag, her expression turned serious and a little confused. My mother grew up on a small island near Okinawa, and when I was done telling her about the dream, she told me that there was an old custom where she was from to wipe people's faces with rags to cleanse them of spirits. Of course, I had no idea about this custom from her hometown, so we were both shocked that I dreamt about it. A young fisherman and his mentor have a rather odd encounter with a spiritual location. But what's the truth behind it? And did something summon them there? Find out in Angaimidouchi. I'd like to tell you a rather strange story that happened to me a few months ago. One day, I was checking fishing spots with my mentor. We had a map on hand, but it wasn't a normal map. It was a thick book that was also full of the local history of the island we were on. We lived on a small island near Okinawa that you could drive around in a single hour. The landscape was rugged, and there were lots of places that were hard for people to reach. This local history / map of the island showed detailed divisions and place names from the coast all the way into the mountains. It also included explanations for several points of interest, such as prisons and places of worship. And as I was looking at fishing spots and found locations I didn't know, I asked my mentor if he knew about them, what kind of places they were, etc., as I read. But when I asked him about one place in particular, he stopped. "What did you say just now?" Up until that point, he had simply answered my questions, and that was it. I said, "Angaimidouchi. Do you know it?" I asked. My mentor said that while he was working in the fields around 3 months ago, suddenly a word came to mind. That word was Angaimidouchi. But it wasn't just once. It appeared in his head over and over again. He found it strange, as it wasn't a word he'd ever heard before, but he soon forgot all about it. But hearing me say it, he suddenly remembered it and was surprised to hear me ask about it out loud. I didn't mention it yet, but my mentor is one of those people with a sixth sense. Sometimes he can predict things with surprising accuracy, and he seems to hold a strange power that other people don't have. So, was this some sort of premonition of his? I loved that sort of stuff, so I was excited. According to the book, Angaimidouchi was along the coast, and it meant place of water to the east. On this island, rivers and streams were considered to be sacred land, so this seemed to be a place of worship, where a kami-sama was worshipped as well. When I told my mentor that, he seemed curious and wanted to go. "Perhaps it is the kami-sama calling me," he said. After that, we asked some of the island elders about it, and apparently it was originally the name of a river. To reach most places of worship, you had to walk across a dangerous coastline that was only visible during the spring tide, when the tide was at its lowest. But if this was a river, then we should be able to cut through the mountains, which would make it comparatively easy to reach. Although I would have preferred to go to a place of worship if possible. There were still a few more days until the next spring tide, and both my mentor and I knew all too well how scary the ocean could be. But either way, we decided to head towards the river. After passing a guardrail and descending a cliff, we soon spotted a small, clear stream. It was beautiful, with numerous spurts of water coming out of the rock face nearby. We walked alongside it, occasionally drinking some and washing our faces with it, hoping for good luck. And then, before we left, we said our thanks to the kami-sama. "Did you notice anything there?" I asked my mentor. My body felt a little heavy, I guess. Honestly, I was kind of disappointed when I heard that. It's a little embarrassing to say as a 20-year-old adult, but I was hoping that there would be some sort of dramatic change to my mentor's body when we arrived, or some miracle might occur. With my hopes dashed, we returned to the ocean and got back to fishing. Once we'd caught a few, we returned to my mentor's home for a drink and then went to bed. Some time later, I woke up to my mentor mumbling about something. At first, I thought he was just talking in his sleep, but gradually his voice got louder. I listened closer to hear what he was saying. "Quit fooling around. That's enough. Go and die already." He kept repeating things like that in my direction. There was nobody else there but me, and as soon as I realized that, suddenly a strong anger welled up inside. What the hell, man? I didn't even know what I was angry at, but if he wanted to grumble about something, then he should say it to me directly. Quit making a fool of me. I got up and turned the light on, and although I was angry, I was also a coward, so I moved away from him to sulk and have a drink. But before long, I threw it all up. I threw it all up because I discovered who my mentor was talking about. It was the thing sleeping exactly in between us. Of course, only my mentor could see it, not me. They were so close he could basically breathe on it, and he fought desperately against it as he was paralyzed and unable to move. But what on earth was that thing doing there? A chill ran down my spine. My mentor and I were only sleeping about half a tatami mat away from each other, which meant that thing was right next to me as well. It was pretending to be you. I asked my mentor about it, and as soon as he said that, I rushed to the toilet to throw up. Wasn't it a kami-sama that we summoned at Angaimidouchi? If something was going to happen, then it should have been something good, right? My mentor said that it probably had nothing to do with Angaimidouchi, and it was gone now, so everything would be okay. But even once I was done throwing up, I was still too worked up and unable to calm down, so I stayed there until morning. Several months have passed since then, and we still don't know the true identity behind the voice my mentor heard. We haven't experienced anything odd since then, but I still secretly hope that voice really was from the kami-sama of the river, and that something miraculous will happen to my mentor before long. A group of students go on a trip to Okinawa, and while there, one of them decides to play a prank on a friend. But this prank will end up lasting decades. And in the end, who was the one really playing who? Find out in Talisman. This is a chilling experience I had not too long ago. At first, I wasn't sure whether I should write about it on the Ni Channel occult boards or in this particular thread, but I decided to write about it here. Once you've read through my experience, if you happen to know any information that might be related to it, then I'd love to hear from you. A few years ago, when I was still just a high school student, I had a friend by the name of Shigeru. It wasn't his actual name, but rather a nickname he got from the fact that his father's name was Shigeru, and he also had a beard. At any rate, everyone in class called him Shigeru. He was a peculiar guy, being the only one in our class who didn't have a phone, and he often used strangely outdated language. It wasn't like he wanted to stand out or anything, but he found it amusing, I think. But at heart, he was a serious guy. And at the very least, he never tried to look down on others or frighten them or anything like that. And he and I first met and became friends in high school. Sorry, I need to continue with even more backstory now, but now I'd like to write about the event that caused all this. A few years ago, when I was in the second grade of high school, we went to Okinawa on a school trip. At our school, every second grade student had to make a choice of where they wanted to go for the designated school trip: America, Singapore, or Okinawa. Shigeru and I chose Okinawa, and so we ended up in the same group. During the day, we took a bus to go sightseeing, and at night, we secretly got together to have some fun away from the teacher's prying eyes. On the first night, we all turned the lights off early and got into bed. We were no doubt exhausted from the plane trip there. But we were still in high spirits, and so we chatted as we lay in bed. First, we chatted about girls, and then our plans for the following day. And then finally, we took turns telling scary stories. The four of us in our group, including me, weren't all that well versed in scary stories, so we just shared a single one we'd heard somewhere else. And then Shigeru told the rest of the stories. He was a great storyteller, and they were all terrifying. When he was done, everyone would scream and laugh. "Man, that's terrifying," I also said as I listened. But then I also started to think about how I couldn't let him be the only one to scare us, and I had to return the favor somehow. And as the night wore on, I soon realized that our second day in Okinawa had arrived. Once we were done with sightseeing for the day, I was walking down the hall in the hotel, heading back to our room, when I noticed a talisman on the floor. That's right, a talisman. I picked it up without thinking. The floor was carpeted and kind of dirty and faded, and the talisman had "Talisman" written on it. It was red and blue, and just felt very Okinawan. At the time, I came up with a very simple plan. I'm gonna secretly put this in Shigeru's bag to scare him. I would slip it in there without him noticing, wait for him to find it, and then, as he was surprised, I would reveal the truth. I rushed back to the room right away and told the other three about my plan while Shigeru was still out. "Sounds awesome," they said. "Hurry, hurry!" We all laughed as I slipped the talisman into the pocket of his bag. When Shigeru came back, the five of us played cards and waited for him to finally notice the talisman. But, well, Shigeru went the rest of the trip without noticing it. And at some point, we forgot all about it as well, and in the end, we simply enjoyed the rest of our trip. Then we returned to the mainland, and the following year, we all graduated. It wasn't until June this year that I happened to run into Shigeru again. We both applied to our old school for teaching practice, and showed up to the same information session there about it. "Oh," I said as soon as I saw him in a suit, breaking out into a smile as I approached him. He also realized who I was, and shook my hand with a massive smile on his face. I had no idea how nice it would be to run into an old friend who I had no contact details for. He did make an appearance at our reunion when we were 20, but I was sick with the flu at the time, so I couldn't go. And so this was the first time I'd seen him since graduation. He hadn't changed at all, but he said that because he had to attend the information session, he did shave his beard for it. "So all this time you've still had a beard, huh?" I laughed. "Of course," he said, giving me a big smile. We then caught up and chatted for a while. He mentioned how he finally had a phone now that he was a university student, and he told me he was attending a rural university as well. "Oh, right," he said, and then he took something out of his pocket. "Put your hand out," he asked, and so I did as he said. Then he put a talisman in the palm of my hand. I had forgotten all about the talisman by that point, so when I saw it, I looked back up at him like, "What the hell is this?" The smile on his face was now gone, and he looked at me with dead eyes. "This belongs to you," he said. At that moment, I suddenly remembered the talisman from our school trip and got goosebumps. Unable to say anything, I just looked at his face in silence. Shigeru then took his phone out of his pocket like nothing had happened. "We should exchange addresses while we still can," he said, his voice cheerful once again. After a brief pause, I grabbed my phone and we exchanged contact details before parting for the day. And that's the end of my story. Sorry if you were expecting something supernatural. From an onlooker's point of view, it probably wasn't very interesting. And I've no doubt lots of people are thinking, what was even supposed to be scary about that? So let me explain. Shigeru went through both our school trip and the rest of our time at high school without even noticing the talisman. But now, years later, he returned it to me at a location where we just happened to meet by chance. I had no idea we would run into each other there. So, did he carry that talisman with him every single day? Did he notice it right from the get-go and know that I put it in his bag? Did he hear about it at the reunion and then hear that I was studying to become a teacher, so he showed up at the information session with the talisman specifically to give it to me? If so, then fine. I'd actually rather that be what happened. But the moment he said, "This belongs to you," I don't know if this is the right way to put it, but it was like, for a moment, he wasn't himself. It was like someone other than Shigeru was talking. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little, but it was like there was no life inside him. If there was something evil attached to that talisman, and it possessed Shigeru after I put it in his bag, well, I'd feel absolutely terrible about that. But I've never heard of anything bad happening to him or his family. And in the times we've spoken since, he sounds pretty happy as well. I took that talisman to a nearby shrine and had them dispose of it. Nothing has happened to me since then either, and Shigeru and I are now close friends again. A man visits Okinawa for business, but while there, encounters something very local and very terrifying. Find out what in Okinawa Business Trip. Let me tell you about a strange experience I had while I was on a business trip to Okinawa. I was helping to open a branch office in the southern part of the main island, so for a brief period I lived in an apartment there. Whenever I needed to smoke at night, I would have to go outside to do it. There was a spot about a 5-minute walk from my apartment that had a single streetlight and 3 vending machines. It was surrounded by nothing but fields. So I bought a coffee and sat down while I smoked. I did this every night. As I stared at the moon and the streetlight, I saw my own sitting shadow in the reflection of the vending machine. Because I was sitting, it kind of looked like a ball sitting on top of a rubbish bag. After 5 or so minutes, I lit another cigarette. When I was done with that, I decided to go home and go to bed. As I looked at the vending machine again, I noticed there was another shadow next to mine. It was sitting the exact same way. Huh? What the hell? I thought, freezing on the spot. Around 10 seconds later, another shadow appeared. This one was standing. It was like I was squished between the two of them. I could feel eyes on me from both sides. They were right next to me. Frozen, I looked around, but I was the only person there. Unable to stand it any longer, I got up and ran all the way home. Sometime after, I told one of the local employees what happened to me that night. "Ah, you live in such and such ward, don't you? There are lots of air raid shelters out there from the war that they still haven't found yet. Maybe they wanted you to find them. You didn't notice the small memorial stone in the field behind those vending machines? It's out there. Around 20 years ago, they found the skeletons of dozens of people in the mountains and fields out here. This year, they're going to go out looking for bones once again. Would you like to join?" Honestly, I'm kind of scared of Okinawans who are apparently used to this sort of thing. The young man in this next story likes collecting old army gear, but something he picks up in his travels might make him question those choices. Find out why in I Wanted to Be a Hippie. I always wanted to be a hippie, and I jumped on the ferry going to Okinawa without a second thought. After the Vietnam War, the US Army got rid of a lot of their stuff on Okinawa, and so I was able to get combat trousers and boots for real cheap. As I was walking around, acting like I was a soldier, a stranger approached me. "Hey, brother! Come over here and check this out." He appeared to be half Japanese, and he was selling stuff from a mat on the ground. He didn't appear to have a store. He appeared extremely dodgy and mixed simple English into his sentences, but he was also pretty likable, so we soon hit it off. His name was Tom. You often hear how US soldiers end up marrying local women while on base, and that was the story with his parents too. I mentioned that I wanted to be a hippie, and he gave me a sack and a sleeping bag. I then moved from the main island to Ishigaki and Iriomote. There was a beach where hippies gathered on the other side of the village on Iriomote. I started my trek across the island with that beach in mind. There's no path around the island there, so to reach the beach, you have to cut through the jungle. My first night in the jungle, I had a dream. I didn't remember what happened in it, but I remember being terrified. I woke up in my sleeping bag covered in sweat. The night after that, I had another nightmare. Again, I was terrified, but this time I also woke up in intense pain. Generally, it would take 3 to 5 days to cross the jungle, but I found myself going slower and slower after having nightmares each and every night. I felt quite a bit of pressure trying to keep my schedule, and I also started to fear death. On the third night, I had yet another nightmare. It started with intense pain, like something hot and sharp was poking my stomach. My right hand also throbbed with hot and then cold pain. Around me, I could hear voices that sounded like they were screaming something. My body was floating in the air. No, several people were carrying me. And then I heard a loud voice right by my ear. Was that English? I nodded, and then the pain disappeared, just like that. I felt so much better. Before long, I heard that loud voice by my ear again. I nodded. I felt great. This went on. And when I opened my eyes, for the first time, the images in my dream sprang to life like reality. In my narrow field of vision, I was surrounded by soldiers. One of them brought his face so close to mine that he almost kissed me, and then he showed me a hole in his ear. The man shook his head, and then forced me to close my eyes. I was put inside something, and I heard a zipper close. After that, I couldn't hear, feel, see, or even think anything. It was like I didn't exist. I didn't exist? No, I was dead. Dead. The moment I realized that, I woke up. And until I reached that Hippy beach, I experienced that same death numerous times. When I finally reached the beach, it was full of hippies. Everyone was naked. I got naked as well and joined them. But even after I reached the beach, I still kept having that nightmare about dying. One day, I told the others about what was happening to me. "Your sleeping bag. It's a body bag," they told me. And finally, I understood. That dream I was having was the final moments of a soldier who died in the Vietnam War. I was reliving it over and over. I asked them why they didn't tell me sooner, and they said they thought I was doing it on purpose, so I could experience the ecstasy of that large dose of morphine you get before you die. Apparently, it's a famous story amongst hippies known as the body bag drug. A young man who goes fishing at a local harbour instead finds something else, something far more terrifying. Will he escape this encounter unscathed? Find out in Okinawan Harbour. Hey, listen to this scary experience I once had. So, I live in Okinawa, and in December the year before last, I went fishing in the harbour by the swimming area. Someone was already there, so I said hello and we chatted briefly. I haven't gotten any bites today, and it's pretty cold, so I'm gonna head back," he then said. I think it was around 11 p.m. at the time, and so I was left alone. There was a strong breeze, and it was pretty cold, so I sat inside my car and played some Game Boy for a while to kill time. I sat there for around an hour, but I didn't get any bites, so I packed everything up and got back in the car to drive home. I started the engine, put the lights on, and put the car into drive. And then I saw legs. Somebody was sitting in the passenger's seat. Slowly, I looked up, and a woman was sitting there, her eyes downcast. She was drenched. What the hell? I had no idea what was going on. I wanted to scream and run, but I froze, still holding the gear stick. Then I finally found my voice. Would you mind getting out, please? What an idiot I was. But just like that, the woman disappeared. And the seat wasn't wet either. It was dry. Weirdly, I was perfectly calm at the time, but as soon as I realized what had just happened, panic set in, and I sped away from there as fast as I could. The whole way home, I kept checking my mirrors to see if she was chasing me. I haven't been back to that harbour since. Be careful of the shamans you hire for important rituals, as they may not always be what they claim to be. Find out why in Sharp Yuta. I was born and raised in Okinawa. In Okinawa, we have a saying, half doctor, half Yuta. If things aren't going well, or you're not feeling too hot, then even now, a lot of people will go and see a Yuta, a type of shaman, like an Itako, about it. And if someone dies, you summon a Yuta as well, because it's customary to ask the deceased whether they were satisfied with their funeral or not too. So, with all that out of the way, my grandparents had 10 kids, and their third son, so one of my uncles, died shortly after being born. This was back before the war. Anyway, I don't really remember this all too clearly, but I think that children who die at such a young age can't be buried with the rest of the family. And so they had a special grave built in a different area of the mansion grounds, and they buried him there instead. My grandparents summoned a Yuta, and they asked him to hold the ceremony for them. But after, my grandfather screwed up his face, and my grandmother asked him why. "That Yuta's terrible. Our prayers will never reach our boy." "Why's that?" my grandmother asked. "I have good ears. He was just chanting random words, like burdock and bone broth. He just kept saying food terms." Okinawa has many Yuta, but a lot of them are fake too. But my grandfather had no proof that he was fake, and so matters ended just like that. 40 years or so later, my grandfather passed away. After we were done handling his ashes, a Yuta, different to the other one in this story, then gave us a message from my now deceased grandfather. "There's a child crawling towards my grave, but it seems they can't get inside. I think it's our boy, that third son, and I want to hold him, but I can't. Please do something about it for me." Seemed the prayers really didn't reach their son, and so they performed a ceremony for him once again. And apparently, shortly after that, my grandfather appeared before that Yuta again. "I was able to hold him," he apparently said happily. I don't have any sixth sense whatsoever, so I don't know which Yuta was telling the truth or not, but I choose to believe that my grandfather and uncle are happy now. A young woman brings back something from Okinawa that isn't your usual souvenir. A spirit. But what does this spirit really want? Find out in Standing Still. When I was a university student, I went to Okinawa for a holiday, and the night I returned home, I saw a soldier standing in my room. I was absolutely terrified, but he just stood there before disappearing shortly thereafter. He was thin with a bad complexion, so I thought maybe he died of hunger during the war. The next day, I put out some tea and a rice bowl for him, and then waited. He appeared again that night, but again he just stood there before disappearing a short time later. For the next few days, I prepared tea and rice bowls for him, but he never moved. He just stood still on the spot before disappearing. Maybe he doesn't like what I'm offering, I thought, and so I put out even more rice balls with some pickles and miso soup as well. This went on for about a week, and because I waited until late each night to see him, soon I was unable to fight my exhaustion. And so I prepared a full Japanese meal for him. Tea, rice balls, miso soup, pickles, grilled salmon, and steamed buns, and then went to bed early. During the night, a presence woke me up, and stealing a glance, I saw the soldier wolfing the food down. He was crying a little. Then, when he was done, he stood up, faced me, saluted, then disappeared. I never saw him again after that. The The next morning, the food I thought he had eaten was still there, but it had been drained of all moisture. It was hard to believe it had only been sitting there for a single night. But the tea and miso soup were entirely gone. I later spoke to my grandfather, who had never enlisted, about what happened. "Dead or alive, that's what men are like," he said. "We have a strange sense of pride. He probably just didn't want a young lady watching him eat." Because I wanted to watch him, I had dragged things out even more torturously for him. Thinking that, I felt a little bad for him. And finally this week, a brother and sister experience an incredibly bizarre event when they are younger. But when they grow up, it seems that weird event isn't yet over. Find out why in Park Aquarium. In my hometown in Okinawa, there's a famous aquarium nearby. When I was a kid, I went to that park there with my mother and younger sister. She was just 3 years old at the time. When my mother went to the toilet, I was running around and playing with my sister. But then, she suddenly vanished. I mean, she literally disappeared right in front of me, like she turned into smoke. I had no idea what happened, and so I just stood there, frozen on the spot. When my mother got back, I just explained what I'd seen. Other grown-ups who were there at the time also saw her disappear, so everyone was running around like crazy. We searched for her everywhere, and then, as we were talking to the police, we heard an announcement saying they had found a lost child. We rushed over and found my sister drinking some juice with some parents and a child that we didn't know. They were tourists from the Kansai area, and apparently they were shocked when a child jumped out of the grass as they were walking around the park. Because there weren't any other people around, they thought she had to be lost, and so they brought her here. It was a huge park, and the area they found her on was right on the opposite side, a distance you could only cover quickly by bus or something. It was strange, and nobody could quite explain it. But in the end, we were just happy that she was found safe and sound. For some reason, my sister was quite attached to the boy. He was around elementary school aged, and wouldn't let go of him. The boy seemed troubled by this, but we were able to pry her off him, and then we gave our thanks and returned home. 20 or so years later, my sister left Okinawa to move to Kansai for work, and then she got married. Her partner was a terribly kind man, so everyone was happy. And then one day, my mother got a call from my sister. Apparently, her husband had lost both his parents, and as they were going through their things, they found some photo albums. In them, she found a photo of a child with her husband when he was just a kid, but the other child in that photo looked just like her. When she asked her husband about it, he said it was taken when they went to Okinawa, but he didn't remember it. And so she asked our mother if she knew anything about it. And, surprised, she told my sister about that time she disappeared as a kid. Maybe her husband was the boy from that time. But maybe it was just a coincidence as well. So she asked her to send the photo so she could check. When our mother got the photo, she was speechless. There was no doubt about it. That was my younger sister. Our mother was into sewing at the time, and because she always wanted a girl, she often made clothes for her. The girl in the photo was wearing a dress my mother had made for my sister, so there was no doubt it was her. When I heard that and saw the picture, I got goosebumps. No matter how you looked at it, that was my sister. The parents were smiling so brightly, and we figured it was probably because that girl, my sister, was clinging so tightly to their son. How on earth could something like this even happen? I said to my mother. But the only real mystery was how she disappeared in the first place. It really didn't make any sense. Like, in the time it took me to think, huh? She was already gone. I still clearly remember how I felt at that precise moment. But as a side note, my sister and her husband apparently met at an izakaya bar after a fire broke out, and they both ran outside. A huge thank you and shout out to this week's Kami tier members, Ellisy, Emerald and Kenneth Kawamoto. It's thanks to your support, along with everyone else, that I'm able to keep doing this show, so thank you very much. Don't forget to check out Kaihan, Bizarre Crimes That Shook Japan Volume 2, out on Amazon right now. And check out our merchandise store at kowabana-shop.fourthwall.com. And if you'd like to chat about this week's stories, come and join us in the Kowabana Discord. You can find that link in the description or on kowabana.net. You can also check out our Patreon at patreon.com/TaraADevlin for exclusive bonus stories and extras, or our YouTube channel at youtube.com/KowabanaJapan for all sorts of Japanese horror you won't find anywhere else. Thanks guys, stay safe, and I'll see you again next time for even more Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. Want even more scary stories? Head over to kowabana.net for new translations every week. You can also join our Patreon for exclusive stories you won't find anywhere else. Head over to kowabana.net now.